Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have a very, very interesting and different program for you tonight. It's a topic that we have not heard about, at least not to my recollection. Susan Swiatek is the Virginia State Director for MUFON, and she's come to us to talk about Men in Black. Sue spent her early years gazing up the star-filled skies of the Rocky Mountains and reading Charles Fort's collections of anomalies. When John Fuller's account of Betty and Barney Hill's interrupted journey exploded onto the scene in 1966, Susan was hooked on the UFO and abduction mystery. Though she felt that the Hills story had a ring of truth, she was less certain about one of the most bizarre aspects of the UFO phenomenon: reports by witnesses that they were visited by menacing persons whose behavior seemed on the surface to resemble government operatives aimed at intimidating them. However, descriptions of these alleged G-men reveal that their behaviors were always just a little bit off. Like many UFO researchers, Susan initially considered the Men in Black accounts to be mythological, far from the nuts and bolts aspects of UFOs. However, eventually her own research and that of author Jenny Randles convinced her that what was once thought to be mere folklore was indeed very real, as well as mysterious and sinister. The details of the most famous MIB cases and Susan's own investigations form unmistakable patterns for which a random imagination simply cannot account. Only when the reality of the MIB's existence is accepted among UFO researchers can its true nature be unraveled. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Susan Swiatek.
Thanks for that great welcome here. Should I bring that down? Okay, let's do that. Okay, I'm going to get set up here, and meanwhile I'll talk at the same time. First of all, it's just great to be here. I appreciate Sandra asking me to come out. I really appreciated that. I'm not sure where she even heard about me from, but I appreciate that. And I want to give some special recognition to Ralph McCarran, who I can't see because of the lighting, but he's in here somewhere. But he did some fine work for the Fund for UFO Research, which I'm also very much involved in. In fact, I was involved with the Fund for UFO Research long before I was State Director for Virginia. I don't know if any of you made it to the 1999 conference out in Crystal City, just outside of Washington, but I ran that conference, and I think we had a total of participants of all the days put together of 600 people. And those were the days of Firmage and a few other crazy things going on. But I got drafted to be State Director by John Schuessler because our State Director in Virginia had stepped down, and that happened about 4 years ago. And I admit I've been remiss in my administrative duties of State Director, but I'm trying to pick up on that. And I'm really excited about the direction MUFON's taking with the database, the CMS, which is the case management system, especially since they've now turn their focus in due time to the abduction mystery and trying to capture those narratives. Many years ago, we had a project of a transcription project. I don't know if many of you remember that project, but I personally and my husband and many people from the Fund for UFO Research and many researchers all over the country participated in building that database, and I think we ended up with 600 cases in that database of abduction narratives that were transcribed very faithfully by a lot of volunteers and put into some kind of database. And I'm not sure where that is today, but they said obviously they didn't lose keystrokes if that kind of work went into it, and they're going to try to push that into the new abduction part of the case management system, which I'm very happy to hear all that, that's for sure. But I wanted to give special recognition to Ralph McCarran for his work with, the work he does here. But with Ann Druffel, with the McDonald Library tapes from the University of Arizona, and he was really brilliant and diligent. You know, it's easy to be brilliant. We all have moments of brilliance. That's easy for me to do. But the diligence part, I mean, night after night, he went through these tapes. We're talking hundreds of hours of tapes, and did a beautiful job. The downside to it is we're getting a lot of static on the line from the University of Arizona. After the project was complete and they gave us access to the tapes, now they're saying, oh, but by the way, we own that intellectual property, so you can't do anything with it. So we're kind of messed over in that regard because the fund invested in that project, and we're hoping to reap the benefits of getting the word out and also, you know, the possibility of selling this audio collection. But we're trying to work the bugs out of that and see what I don't know what the future is going to bring. But at least, you know, instead of the tapes decaying in someone's basement, they did go to the University of Arizona, and thanks to Ann Druffel and Ralph McCarran, and I think a couple other people that might have helped a little bit administratively pull that off, but it's done. You know, it's been captured for posterity. At least researchers will have access to it. As a matter of fact, we had some people. Rob Simone was at our house in Virginia just Wednesday of this week. It was a big surprise to me, and all of a sudden there's production crews there, and clapboards are clapping, and the house is a mess, but you know, they always find an angle. You know, those production crews always find an angle, and we had to rearrange all the lamps in the house, but finally they got happy, and they shot something that related to. He was very intrigued by the tapes, and you know, we're hoping that we can get clearance, you know, for his production anyway, to at least, you know, fair use, to quote from some of the audio stuff that we have that related to the project they were working on. So hopefully it will go forward, and hopefully we'll get the go light to use it at least in some capacity. So let me get a little sip of water here, and before I really get into this stuff, I usually don't talk this expanded talk because I usually am stuck with 45 minutes to an hour firm, but I'm hoping to not keep everybody here till the cows come home. So I hopefully I will be able to take questions at the end. I'm aiming for, you know, no more than an hour and a half talk at the most. So anyway. Okay, I'm just gonna see if I can scoot this over a little bit without pulling wires out. I'm afraid my papers are all gonna go flying on the floor. All right, Man in Black, especially around this part of the country, in the vicinity of Hollywood, everybody's heard of MIB, Men in Black. Everybody's at least seen the movie. And those of us in the UFO culture have probably picked up a few more things about Men in Black, or purported Men in Black. But what is the movie pop culture side of things? Well, in my day job, I work for a company that mostly we support NIH and CDC projects. You know, I'm a federal contractor. We also have some Navy work. But anyway, we work a lot with the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health. And they have many subdivisions underneath them. And one of them is the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences under the National Institutes of Health. And when I started cruising around about 2 years ago, really looking seriously at this Man in Black topic, I was plugging Man in Black into the search engines and just to see what would come out. And oddly enough, on an NIH website for the children, they have posted the lyrics to Man in Black. How does that relate to environmental health? You got me there. But it's part of their mission about teaching kids to learn about science. But I found the lyrics to the song, which evidently were in the movie, very interesting. I want to read just a little bit from that. And I'll try to get a beat going here a little bit, but it's the MIBs. Here comes the Men in Black. It's the MIBs. Oh, here come the MIBs. Here come the Men in Black. They won't let you remember. The good guys dress in black, remember that. Just in case we ever face-to-face and make contact, the title held by me, MIB, means what you think you saw, you did not see. Walk in shadow, move in silence, guard against extraterrestrial violence. But yo, we ain't on no government list. We straight don't exist. No names, no fingerprints. Saw something strange, watch your back, because you never quite know where the MIBs is at. Here come the Men in Black, the Galaxy Defenders. Here come the Men in Black. They won't let you remember. So in this version, they're heroes, and of course in the movie they're heroes. They're the Galaxy Defenders. They're defending us against the evil aliens. But I would have to say that in real life, when people encounter a Man in Black, they are not reassured. They do not feel that it's a hero, and it's very much a mixed bag. I also saw a website called www.carpenoctem.tv, and Carpe Diem, seize the day, so Carpe Noctem, seize the night, I suppose, .tv. And there's a write-up about MIBs there. I want to quote a little bit from that. Unfortunately, I do have to read a lot tonight, and then we'll get into some of my own cases where I'm not reading as much. But in modern accounts, the MIBs are usually connected in some way to UFO activity. The most common scenario has them appearing on the scene after a UFO encounter to intimidate witnesses with extremely peculiar and often threatening behavior. Dressed in ill-fitting or out-of-style black suits, the classic MIB tend to travel in twos or threes, but often in singles. Their modes of transport vary. They seem to prefer to cruise the paranormal back streets in black limousines, but they've also been known to pilot the occasional van, and in a few recent accounts have traded up to that all-purpose conspiracy vehicle, the black helicopter. Yet despite their outre mien, the MIB most often seem to buy American, usually vintage 50s Cadillacs that eerily enough smell brand new. Witnesses who report MIB sightings often describe foreign-looking, exotic, they look there from elsewhere, they look to Indian or Asian. They're deeply tanned, though in some cases they're extremely pale with painted-on lips. In one case, one was very pale with painted-on red lipstick, and when he put his glove to his mouth, the red lipstick came off on his glove. So these are the situations. They usually have unnaturally long fingers, and they're usually tall and thin, but they can be short and stout. And of course they have the odd behavior. We've all heard the stories about someone serving an MIB some Jell-O and they tried to drink it like it was a fluid. Or another account I read was they were asked if they wanted some Coke to drink, and they got all excited. Yeah, okay. So the Coca-Cola was brought out, and they seemed to spend their whole time staring at the bubbles and analyzing how that was working. Never took a sip. But that's a typical so-called MIB encounter. MIBs frequently speak tortured English with outlandish accents. In some accounts, they don't even move their lips when they communicate, suggesting an act for telepathy. While in other encounters, they speak like machines. When it comes to MIB, the subtext is always, "We're not from around here." And as far as popular culture goes in the UFO field, even though maybe a lot of us weren't around to read it, and some of us were, but in 1957, Gray Barker came out with his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And Albert K. Bender from Connecticut had asked Barker to be a UFO investigator in his organization in West Virginia. So that was the beginning of their connection. But Bender's initial enthusiasm for investigating quickly was chilled after he was paid a visit by three men in black suits. At first, Bender hinted that the men were government agents who had threatened him because I had stumbled upon something that I was not supposed to know. But Gray Barker, in his typical style, he escalated the suspense, and Bender's book came out, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, was a big letdown. But, well, Bender's book, The Flying Saucers and the Three Men, that was the big letdown after They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. That was Barker's big buildup, and when the final book came through, it was just sort of like, you know, fanboy, fanzine, sci-fi stuff that didn't really exactly please the audience. They were really looking for something that was not just fantasy-based. But that's the pop culture side, or that's what we've inherited from hearing about Gray Barker and Bender and these early books and these early rumors of cases. But how does the real phenomenon, if there is a real phenomenon, how did it behave? How did it start? So I'm going to go to my next image here. There's a slightly different order than I normally do it in, so I'm going to have to look for this one, but I see it here. This is another reference that I found when I was casting about on the internet for Men in Black. What a strange thing. Someone wrote a book called Men in Black, this guy John Harvey, and you're thinking, what the heck was that about? Has nothing to do with UFOs, has nothing to do with odd characters. It's all about men wearing black clothing. And from a societal viewpoint, how did that evolve? Why do men wear black suits when in previous eras and times they wore very colorful outfits? I thought that was very interesting. The synopsis reads like this: men's clothes went black in the 19th century. Dickens, Ruskin, and Baudelaire all asked why it was, in an age of supreme wealth and power, that men wanted to dress as if going to a funeral. The answer is in this history of the color black. Although in the 20th century, tastes have moved towards new colors, black has retained its authority, as well as its associations with strength and cruelty. I like that, strength and cruelty. At the same time, black is still smart, and fashion keeps returning to black. So I thought that was another interesting reference out there. I'm going to move back in time, actually, to my next image, which is Kenneth Arnold. Here's the original Fate cover. Kenneth Arnold is a very complex story, and maybe most of you don't even know that there was a Man in Black element to it with the Maury Island incident. It's extremely complicated. So I'm going to try to convey this extremely complex scenario in a little bit of time here, but I'm going to have to once again be pretty much dependent on my notes because it's so complicated. But we all are familiar with the Kenneth Arnold sighting. June 24th, 1947, that's where it all started. He was a salesman from Boise, Idaho, had a small plane called a Cal Air, single-engine Cal Air plane, and he would fly around to industrial sites and small airfields, and he would sell them fire suppression equipment, and that was his job. So he was always zooming around Washington State all the time. He was heading back to Yakima in this case, and he'd heard on his radio that there was a downed aircraft or suspected downed aircraft, and they wanted pilots in the area to look for it. So he lowered his altitude and diverted himself a little bit in the area of Mount Rainier in hopes that he might see this wreckage and help out and then possibly get a reward. So he's at a relatively low altitude, and he looks over in the direction of Mount Rainier, and there's this bright flash. And that kind of bright flash always scares a pilot because that's usually coming off a reflective surface of another aircraft. So you want to make sure that you have visual sighting of where they are, and so you don't have a collision of any kind. So that was his feeling when he saw the bright flash. He saw another one, and then he finally realized where it was coming from. And he saw these 9 curious objects in echelon formation. And I want to say something about the shape. The shape that you see here is pretty close to the original shape that he actually described and actually drew that day. It was like the heel of a shoe. This is close, but it's still not there. It's like the heel of a shoe, and instead of just connecting the points at the end of the heel of the shoe, it actually came to a point. So this thing has a little concavity. It would actually be something that came to a point more. So no depiction has really done it. I did a drawing of it once that I was happy with, but a lot of strange drawings came out of it because it was a misunderstanding. At one point he said the length of the object and the height of the object, or the thickness, was a ratio of like 1 to 20. And for some reason, one of the Air Force guys thought that it was like a very long kind of craft, and they kind of got mixed up, and they made these very, very long crescent-shaped objects that were like 20 times as long as they were in the other dimension, and it was not what he had said at all. But this is the closest. This is kind of close, but just imagine a point coming off the back there. Another thing I like to bring up about this sighting is there's a term now going around in ufology called pelicanists. These people that say, oh, Kenneth Arnold sighting, it was really just pelicans, or this sighting was just pelicans. So we call them pelicanists, these people that are trying to argue these old cases. And it was just a reflection. That's another thing about Kenneth Arnold. Well, he was flying at a fairly low altitude, and he rolled the window down or moved the window down, however you do it in that particular model of plane. And he saw it straight air. He did not see it through glass. So I want to clarify that in case anybody throws that up at you about Kenneth Arnold here. Well, anyway, he's looking for this downed aircraft, and he doesn't see it, but he sees these 9 unbelievable craft. They're going at about 1,000 miles an hour. He's very excited, and they were moving in this kind of unusual, erratic way, and he thought similar to saucers skipping across water. That was what he said when he landed. He landed at Yakima. He described the sighting to pilots. At the time, the whole country was kind of gripped in this mystery disc thing, the summer of '47. And the whole country was ripe for a big sighting like this. Well, those pilots immediately got it somehow on the radio. It was a big deal. When he did land at his next destination, which was Pendleton, Oregon, there was an air show going on, and all the air show enthusiasts were all in an uproar because they'd heard on the radio about, Kenneth Arnold, he's coming into this airport. He just saw these 9 craft, and it was a big thing. And he didn't realize that. There was like a huge crowd. There was reporters there, and that's when he told the reporters about the way they moved, not the way they looked, but the way they moved was like saucers skipping across water, and or like saucers, and that's how flying saucers came to be. Well, So far, we know this story pretty well, and we're not confused yet, but you're about to get real confused. 10 days later, a United Airlines pilot, a Captain E.J. Smith, with his co-pilot, saw 9 objects over Emmett, Idaho. Well, when Kenneth Arnold heard another pilot seeing 9 objects, he rushed to meet Captain Smith, and so they immediately got along very well. Meanwhile, Ray Palmer of Amazing Stories, and also a Fate, he put out Fate. This is the first issue of Fate. You know, obviously it has the Kenneth Arnold story on it. Ray Palmer of Amazing Stories fame starts writing letters to Arnold. Oh, I got to get a scoop on your story. And Arnold just sends him the same thing he sent the Air Force, the Army Air Force at that time. Just carbon copied the same thing. He didn't write up anything special for Ray Palmer, but Ray Palmer keeps sending him letters like, I want you to help me investigate this. I want to get a scoop on your inside story. Well, finally, the third letter that Ray Palmer sends says, hey, you know, you're a pilot, you're there in Washington, there's a really big sighting in Tacoma, Washington I want you to look into. Can you go fly out and check it out? I'll pay you. Well, at the moment, Arnold isn't interested because right then he's busy meeting with 2 intelligence officers who have heard about his story, and they fly into Boise to see him, you know, because he lives in Boise. And Arnold said to them, Captain Smith, you know, he's a United Airlines pilot that saw something. He's coming into town today. And the G-men, I'll just call them the intelligence officers or G-men, they said, well, Captain Smith's another guy on our list. We want to talk to him too. And they looked around at all the letters that Arnold was getting at the time, and the ones they were interested in were not from the witnesses. Arnold kept saying, here's a witness, here's a witness. They weren't interested in that. They wanted to look at the letters from organizations and these little grassroots organizations that were trying to pull together. That's what they were really interested in. So they took those letters and they said, keep in touch. Let us know if anything big happens. So he took them at face value. But they also said, it's better not to discuss this with outsiders. Okay. So Arnold sits there. Now that the G-men are gone, he thinks, well, should I go up to Tacoma, Washington and examine this thing Palmer wants me to look into? I have the letter. What should I do? He just happens to bump into somebody at a Rotary Club meeting and said, hey, you're into this stuff. I heard there was a big sighting in Tacoma, Washington. You ought to check it out. So that's validation for him. Somebody in his hometown that talks about this sighting. So he says, I think I'm going to go. So he says, let me test the waters. And he says to Palmer, hey, what do you think about, you know, maybe giving me some front money expenses to go there and really do a good job on this? Well, immediately, instantaneously, Palmer wires him $200, which was a big sum in Arnold's mind at the time, 1947. So as soon as he gets the money, he doesn't even tell anybody he's going. He doesn't tell a soul, didn't even tell Palmer, I'm really going to take you up on this thing. He just immediately just says, the heck with it, I'm flying up there. So he cruises into town at Tacoma, Washington, which is an area he does not know well. He starts sidling around town. There's a couple little motels, hotels, whatever. There is no room in town whatsoever. He's like, how could this be? You know, there's all these little hotels and not a single room. Well, finally, his last choice is this very ritzy, swanky hotel, his last choice in town. His choice of last resort, because it was practically a resort. He goes up there and he says, this Hotel Winthrop. Okay, he goes up there and they say, oh yes, Kenneth Arnold, we have a reservation for you. And he's like, what? You know, what do you mean you got a room for me already? Oh yeah, you're all set, room 502. So he thinks that somebody else named Kenneth Arnold has arranged for a room and he's just going to sneak in because the other guy didn't turn up, which makes no sense, but that's how his mind's working. So he goes in the room, okay, fine. He opens the local phone book, looks up the name that he's told to look for, which is this guy Dahl, and it's Harold Dahl, that's D-A-H-L. Looks up Harold Dahl and says, hey, I'm Kenneth Arnold, I'm in town, I'm trying to research your big sighting, can we get together? And believe it or not, Dahl says, you know, this UFO stuff is far stranger than you could ever imagine, and I'm not sure you want to get mixed up in it. I'm not sure I want to talk about it. And actually, it comes to pass that Kenneth Arnold has to convince this guy Dahl to cooperate with him. But eventually, he does cooperate, and they do get together. So they get together in the room, and they do talk about the situation. And the time on this is July 29th, when they finally get together. Well, this witness, Harold Dahl, tells this story. On June 21st is when the sighting occurred for Dahl. So this is even prior to, allegedly, prior to when Kenneth Arnold has his sighting. So on June 21st, this guy Dahl is a harbor patrolman at Puget Sound, and he's out there trawling for salvage or whatever the patrolman does, and he does have an official camera to verify or validate whatever, maybe something that's gone aground or what have you. And with him he has his 15-year-old son and the dog. They're out in this little boat, and all of a sudden, they're about 3 miles offshore, and there's a little island there called Maury Island. And this island, Maury Island, that's M-A-U-R-Y, Maury Island, it's just a little island for fishermen. They pull up, or people have a picnic. It's not inhabited or anything like that. It's a very small island. Well, they're out by this Maury Island when all of a sudden they see 6 UFOs coming at them. And one of them seems to be in trouble, and the other ones are circling around, and it's this huge display. Well, the one that's having trouble, this stuff starts raining down that looks like confetti at first, but then they realize it's strips of metal, like aluminum, thin aluminum. And that was okay, that's kind of fascinating. So they tried to get some pictures with their official harbor camera, and they took a few pictures real quick. But then things get a little hairy, because now all of a sudden this molten metal, like slag-like material, starts coming down. I mean, copious quantities. So it's so bad that they quickly ditch the boat on the island and try to hide in rock outcroppings, because it's really bad news, this stuff coming down. Well, it killed the dog. Poor dog didn't make it. And the son is badly beaten up, and he broke his arm and had to go to the hospital. And this guy Dahl just picks up a couple of pieces and puts them in his pocket to show something. And they bury the dog at sea, come back, he takes his son to the hospital. He goes into his boss. Fred Chrisman was the boss at the Harbor Patrol, and said, Fred, this terrible thing happened, blah, 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 and the boat's a little damaged, but it doesn't look too bad, my dog's dead, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Chrisman didn't really believe him, but he took the film and he took the material from him, and he just said, that's a wild tale, or whatever. And then a day or two later, Chrisman goes out to the Maury Island, and they're very familiar with the island, and in his mind, according to Chrisman, he does see a bunch of deposits of this material. And he starts to pick it up, and lo and behold, he sees a weird aircraft go by. And so he's totally become a believer at this point. So he puts a whole bunch of this stuff in various boxes, and he's got a larger boat at his disposal, and comes back, becomes a believer. A couple days later, the film is developed, and there's not any images on the film. It's just got a lot of light spots on it, as if it had been in the presence of radiation or something. It just didn't develop properly. That's another thing that allegedly, I say allegedly because these are just people talking, but Chrisman takes that as evidence as well. Well, this is June 21st, the original sighting, and when you call it sighting, it was also an event with this slag-like material coming down. That was June 21st. On June 22nd, the very next day at 7 a.m., this guy Dahl, who had this experience, and his son's in the hospital, a man comes to Dahl's house. He's dressed in a nice suit, a black suit. He looks about 40. And he says, I'd like to take you to breakfast. And he said, that wasn't unusual. Guys come in all the time, and they've got some commercial deal they got going, and they want to rent my boat, or they want me to go help me salvage something, or get a boat up or something. Not unusual. But what was unusual is he took me to the fancy part of town. I mean, we usually just go on the dock, and watermen usually don't go to these fancy places. But this guy was a fancy guy, and he took me to this expensive breakfast. And the guy said, I know exactly what happened to you yesterday. I know more about what happened to you than you know what happened to you. And it wasn't supposed to happen. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. And it's best that you don't discuss this. Well, this totally floors Dahl. Well, this is the story that Dahl begins to tell Kenneth Arnold, okay? And Kenneth Arnold is like, wow, this is really hard to believe. This guy might be a nut. I don't know what's going on. But he listens to the story of here in Tacoma, Washington, at the hotel. Well, Arnold was kind of mixed up, and he just thought the pieces of slag that he saw, he didn't think that they were very impressive. He's just not really sure about this guy. This is such a wild tale, he doesn't know what to believe. So really, he's half inclined to just kind of quietly leave the next day. But he doesn't get a chance. Bright and early, Dahl and Chrisman show up at his hotel room. And Chrisman validates his story. I went back to the island, I saw something weird in the sky, I saw the slag-like material, this stuff isn't normal, here's a whole box of it, I believe my guy. So this kind of steps up this static on the line, and Kenneth Arnold feels like he can't dismiss it so easily, like he's got to take some kind of action. Well, Arnold thinks, who can I call, what can I do? He opts to call his friend Captain Smith, the United Airlines pilot, who also had a sighting, and said that he wanted to look into this stuff. And while Smith's a pilot, he arranges to pretty much fly out immediately. So Captain Smith shows up. Now we're talking, it's July 30th. So there's four of the men are in the hotel room having this discussion. The four men are, Kenneth Arnold, his pilot friend, and Dahl and Chrisman, the two witnesses. So they're all hashing it out, saying, is this really just slag? Are you sure you saw what you saw? And just hashing it over again. Then it gets really weird. The hotel gets a call from someone, and they say, Kenneth, you're sort of like a star. I mean, your name's in the papers all the time. Kenneth Arnold's doing this and that, and you're kind of like a big story. And the UPI, actually they weren't UPI at the time, but I'm going to call them UPI because otherwise it's too hard. They were called United Press. They didn't have the international on there, but let's just say UPI. The UPI news service is calling the hotel saying, we got something really weird going on with Kenneth Arnold. And so it comes to pass, Kenneth Arnold goes down to the hotel desk and gets on the phone, and this guy by the name of Ted Morello, no relation of what I understand, but Ted Morello, actually spelled Morello, but Ted Morello says, hey, I'm the head of the local United Press office, and something really strange is going on. This stranger that won't identify himself keeps calling me and telling me everything that you're doing. Like today he called and said the four guys, identified them by name, are all meeting in the hotel room, and here's what they said about this, here's what they said about that, this is what they might do, but word for word. And so Kenneth Arnold is really wigging out now. He's like, now my room's bugged? I mean, what is going on here? This is the weirdest thing that I've ever seen. So he really feels like he's out of his league. So at that point, and Captain Smith is also mesmerized, he decides, well, those two G-men, the two intelligence guys, seem on the up and up, and they said they'd help me, and if anyone knows about bugs in the room, it'd be them. So he calls up the intelligence guys. Well, they fly out immediately. They just come out immediately, which he thought was kind of odd because it was getting late in the day already, but they had kind of a long flight. I have to work out the math. I don't know how long the flight was. But they showed up immediately. They seemed to take it very seriously. Well, now it's a confusing scene. They have this guy, Ted Morello, from the UPI desk, calls a couple times saying that the mysterious caller keeps informing him of everything that happens. Now he knows that these other guys showed up. Around this time, Dahl kind of gets tired of this whole thing. He said, look, I got to get back to real life. I've been stuck here at this hotel a couple days, but here's another number you can reach me, and I got to go. I neglected to say, and it comes up later, so I have to tell you, at some point Arnold goes out with Dahl to his secretary's house, whatever, and it's this dumpy, barely there kind of shack, but there is some nominal furniture, there is a file cabinet, there is a secretary there seemingly filing things. And these dock workers and so forth, they don't exactly have fancy digs. So this is kind of an office / okay, the secretary stays here, whatever. And Dahl took him there and said, here's some more of that slag-like material, I'm storing it at this place. And in fact, I have so much of it that I'm using one of them for an ashtray. That really freaks Arnold out. He's like, wait a minute, this stuff is so amazing, but you're using it as an ashtray. I mean, this is the confusing back and forth that Arnold has to sort out, and that's why he wanted to leave town until this other development. But Dahl says, look, I gotta go, but here's another number you can reach me at. Let me know if anything comes to a head or something. I'm out of here. But in the room, we still have Chrisman, we still have these principals in there. Okay, the G-men come. Chrisman stays to relate the tale yet again. This is July 31st. So really, a lot has happened. Kenneth Arnold got there on July 29th. It's only July 31st. All this stuff has happened. Well, the two G-men come down. They don't seem that excited about the debris. Oh, this doesn't look that exciting. We'll put it through some tests, but I'm not too hopeful. I don't know about your story, but we'll take it, and we'll put it all in a box. We'll take it out of here. So they put most of it in a box that had been gathered, and there were some stray pieces that Kenneth Arnold still kept, but basically they took the main part away. And they didn't seem too excited about it. But they said, we're going to fly back tonight. He goes, fly back tonight? By the time you get on the airfield, it's going to be 1 a.m. I mean, pilots need to rest. You flew up here, you know, you got to stay. I mean, I can get some more cots in the room. You got to bunk out. You got to do something. No. The plane has to be back for an air show tomorrow. We can't. We got to go back. We're taking this back. That's it. So they leave that night over the misgivings of Kenneth Arnold, quite a few misgivings. So in his room that night, I guess on these cots or whatever, there are 3 men. It's at this point. The 2 G-men fly off into the distance, and we have Arnold, and then the United Airlines pilot Smith, and we have Chrisman are in the room. So at breakfast, they're trying to have breakfast, and they're summoned by the hotel manager again. He goes, this guy from UPI is on the phone, and he's really upset. So they get on the phone with this Ted Morello guy, and he said, all hell's breaking loose. Have you heard the news? And he said, what? And they said, there's 2 guys. They crashed last night. And they're like, no. They said, don't you turn the radio? So they turned the radio on, and sure enough, it was public that they said this Army airfield craft returning to McChord Air Force Base has gone down. 2 men are dead. Well, of course, the UPI guy said, of course, immediately the phone rang, and the mystery caller said, the 2 men went down. Their names are such and such and such and such. They just met with Kenneth Arnold, and so forth and so on. Like once again, the mystery caller knows everything that's going on with everybody. Well, Kenneth Arnold is beside himself. 2 people are dead. He feels responsible for it. He dragged them up there, and they felt compelled to come, and they're tired, and this horrible thing happened. Well, it gets even weirder. The UPI Ted Murillo guy says, look, you got to come in person to my UPI office. We've got to sit down face to face and sort through this stuff. So they go to the UPI office. You're like, well, what happens next? What could it possibly be now? Well, Murillo says, I just recorded an interview with a survivor from the plane crash, and I want you to hear it. So he plays the tape of I guess it was, I don't know if it was in person or on the phone, probably on the phone. And this guy says, well, you know, I just put in a chit to pick up, you know, any aircraft going back to McChord because I had to go do duty. So they, you know, you just take the next transport you can. So they put me on this plane, and there was 4 of us on there, the 2 intelligence guys, and there was a navigator or an engineer of some kind, and myself. And he goes, I never saw these guys, so I don't really know their personalities. I don't really know these people. I can't really read them very well. But as soon as we took off, 1 engine went out, but we can fly with 1 engine. That's no big deal. But I knew that they had loaded this very heavy crate in. It seemed very heavy. And as we were going with the 1 engine, things weren't going right. It was very rocky, and we all knew we were going to go down. It was just a matter of time. So, but these 2 intelligence guys, they had the weirdest look on their face. I mean, they had their parachutes and everything, but they had the funniest look on their face. And they just opened the door and pretty much kicked me out. And the same thing with the navigator. They did the same thing to him. And I'm thinking, they have a weird look on their face, like they know something I don't know. But anyway, I parachute out, and I saw the plane. It kept a steady altitude for quite a while. I mean, they had time to make their decision. He goes, I couldn't believe they died. I can't believe it. And he said, I have no explanation for that. He goes, the only thing I can think of is their cargo was so secret that they were told to guard with their lives, and they took that so seriously that they wouldn't get out. He goes, that's the only thing I could possibly think of. I don't know what they were carrying. I don't know nothing from nothing, but that's the only thing that comes to mind. So it's a very sad, crazy story. But it gets, it keeps going. Well, as sad as it is, this guy, Ted Murillo from UPI, he knows that this is some of the biggest story that he's ever had in his part of the woods. So he runs out to the crash site. Well, he sees it's all cordoned off, and they said, no one's taking any pictures of this crash site. This is a secret operation. You can't get near the crash site. So that pretty much verifies the sensitivity. Well, this airline pilot, Smith, from United Airlines, I mean, he'd had enough of this craziness, and he left the hotel. But he wanted to get to the bottom of it at the same time. So he went to McChord Airfield and returns with this guy, Major Sander, who is the McChord Base Intelligence Commander, and says, you're the highest ranking guy in McChord. What the hell is going on here? You owe us 2 men are dead. This isn't a game now. Well, this intelligence commander shows little interest in the fragments and says, oh, you know, this is probably going to turn out to be a big hoax. These things look like typical slag. This is a big bother. But just in case, let me get every little fragment you have, because we wouldn't want this running around now, would we? And he gathered up all the samples, took every piece of evidence, and then he drove Arnold and Smith around to a smelting operation nearby, and they said he took innumerable right and left turns way out in this unmarked area and said, see this pile of slag? That's what it is. And they're like thinking to themselves, man, this guy went through a lot of trouble to even locate this pile of smelting industrial, you know, smelting slag. And they said, well, why don't you pull over, let's look in the trunk and actually compare the samples, because I don't think that resembles it. And he goes, that's not necessary. This is a perfect match. What are you saying? So that was the end of that. So this guy goes off into the good night with all the rest of the fragments. Well, Arnold and Smith are left alone looking at each other again, and Arnold has the only card he has left to play. He said, we got to talk to Dahl again. He's the beginning of all this. Let's go to his secretary's house. Let's see what's going on there, see if they have any more of the material, and I got to confront Dahl again about this story. Well, he drives to the secretary's house again. He's absolutely 100% sure it's the exact same house, but it looks completely deserted. There's not a stick of furniture. There is nothing in the place. It looks like no one's been there for a while. I mean, his mind is just ready to explode, and he's absolutely certain it was the same place because he made very careful note of the location the first time. At this point, he didn't know what to do. And you know, game over. What can you do? You know, people at the base aren't talking. Some of the witnesses are dead, or some of the people, other people are split. And Dahl and Crispin were just gone. The mystery caller calls UPI again and says, what does he say? I know what he says, but I wanted to get it right here. He just calls up and says, by the way, Crispin has been relocated to Alaska by the Army Air Force. He just left on a flight today. And they were able to verify that there was a flight that left McCord Airfield for Alaska, but you know, they can't prove Crispin was on it. Dahl left his family and business, just disappeared. So it was like a disappearance of two men that I guess the intelligence community engineered or whatever. Maybe they said, you better get out of town or we're going to press charges for a hoax. Who knows what went on? But eventually a report came out and the U.S. intelligence claimed that Dahl and Crispin had just hoaxed the whole thing. But after this whole incident, when Arnold did finally leave Yakima, Washington, he was a little concerned because this is another oddball story, the UPA guy that Ted Morello came up, another bizarre story. When they went down to his office, they said, here's another oddball thing. We got this teletype, similar to a fax today, but we got a teletype right around the time of the crash, just coincidentally. This other pilot, who puts his name in there, pilot such and such, he had a sighting of a rotating UFO and blah, 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 and he reported it to the Army, Air Force, and regular channels. And these two intelligence officers came out to visit him, the same two guys that have been given the case. And he goes, the weird thing is they told me that they're getting really close to solving the UFO mystery. And he says, this is in the teletype right around the time that they crashed, but of course this other pilot could not have known the timing. But he wrote in the letter that they're getting so close to the end of this UFO mystery, I fear for their lives. I think somebody's out to get them. Nobody knows why this pilot wrote that, but how odd. He, you know, the whole thing, it just kind of prefigured it. Well, understandably, Kenneth Arnold is really shaken up by all this, but he has to eventually go back home. So he flies out of Yakima, and he does refuel somewhere, and his first flight was fine, but after he refueled, he got back in the air, and his engines cut off. And he just barely makes a crash landing and saves his life. And if it had been just a slightly different, he wouldn't have made it. You know, the little field he found was just long enough. And then when he looked at the plane, it turned out it was sabotage. Someone had turned a switch to turn off the gas. You know, you can only sputter up so far, and then the hose, that's it. So that put an end to Kenneth Arnold looking into the UFO mystery. But to the last public speaking that he did, Kenneth Arnold really said he didn't buy the hoax thing. If it's a hoax, look at how many working parts there are. Somebody made a reservation at the only hotel for Kenneth Arnold. Someone bugged the room or something. it's just got too many working parts, and really no explanation really works. Once again, it's just one of these wacky tales. But that was really the beginning of the whole Man in Black thing. And I tend to believe Dahl's story because he says that a man came to him after he had a sighting saying, I know more about your sighting than you do. Here's what happened to you. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. I mean, this is 1947. This is before any stories of Man in Black. So that's why I tend to believe that there was really a core issue there that has never really been explained whatsoever. The last bizarre coda to the whole thing, which is another book out there somewhere, but I'm sure you might remember the name Chrisman, and it might ring a bell in your head. But Chrisman was implicated on Dealey Plaza when the JFK shooting. He was in the vicinity. He was one of the hobos that, and I've always wondered about that. Just that one little snippet, like these two hobos were questioned. Well, these are the best dressed hobos I've ever seen. I don't know what was going on. I don't know whether my best idea was that they took Chrisman and Dahl, and the government said, you're into this thing deep, we don't want you to talk. We have a really great opportunity for you. Why don't you just become a government employee, we'll pay you lots of money, and maybe he was there just to be in the vicinity of JFK at that moment, undercover or something, just to provide security. I don't know. Why was he there? Maybe it was a coincidence, but I've always found that to be very strange, and the explanation of him just being a hobo just didn't make it, with me. But so that's the beginning of the real Man in Black problems. Okay, then we move on to, and I'm going to be real brief on this, but the whole John Keel Mothman prophecy era, where John Keel, I think, embellished and exaggerated. But we had a whole era there in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where all kinds of crazy things were going on. This started around November 1966. The first incident, which if you did see the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, this incident was brought into the movie, even though at first sight they're not related. But they were related in time and distance, so it was wrapped into the movie as well as the book. November 1966, this guy Woodrow Derenberger encountered a UFO that landed right in front of his car. It was shaped like an old-fashioned kerosene lamp chimney, flaring at both ends. The unlikely craft landed on the highway in front of Derenberger, and it forced him to hit the brakes. And a normal-looking, height, 5'10" guy with dark skin exited the strange vehicle and approached Derenberger's car. Grinning, the visitor addressed Derenberger without moving his lips. The telepathy thing comes up. And he said his name was Indrid Cold. That's a weird name, Indrid Cold. And he said he hailed from a country much less powerful than the United States, whatever that means. But Derenberger has continual telepathic contacts with this character Indrid Cold, and various things happen. And that sort of is the beginning of this whole problem out there in West Virginia. And the two seem related. And the Point Pleasant episode started with a reporter, Mary Heyer. She witnessed a UFO flying over her backyard, and she had a succession of oddball visitors in thick-soled shoes after that, and a large black car often followed her, peeling away when she noticed it, and it once screeched to a halt and disgorged a man with a flash camera who took her picture. And there was this character named Jack Brown that nobody knew that was running around calling himself Jack Brown, and he would visit one witness and use their name, and then he would go to the next witness, hey, I'm Jack Brown, I'm a friend of Mary Heyer, and then he'd go to the next witness, oh, I'm a friend of so-and-so and Mary Heyer, he would just kind of build this chain. Everybody's scratching their head going, what? And but these witnesses that saw the Mothman creature, which was flying around at high speeds and didn't really have a head. It seemed like the two big red eyes just kind of went down into the shoulders, no discernible head, looked like a giant moth, and affected many people at the time. It was able to keep up with cars going 80 miles an hour without even moving its wings. There were a lot of strange things, and it made a strange squeaking noise. It was a very disturbing thing. One morning, a woman came out with her newborn baby. It was 2 weeks old, and this Mothman creature was kind of acting like a normal moth. It was kind of hiding in the shrubbery, and then it stood up, and of course she freaked out and dropped her baby. But the baby did not have permanent injuries. But this affected real people, in real ways. People are dropping their babies and nearly having accidents because they're seeing this Mothman flying around. There was a lot of other people that had strange visions, and they felt like they had seen Mothman, and they were starting to have predictions about various things. And it's a typical melange where some of the predictions work out, some of the predictions are completely nuts. No one really knows how it ties together. One woman says something bad's going to happen on a certain date, and that does pan out because whether or not it's related or not, but there's the Silver Bridge disaster where a couple days before Christmas, loaded with all these people with their packages, right at rush hour, stuck with a light on this bridge, the whole bridge collapses, and many people lose their lives. And that was the culmination of the Mothman prophecy situation. Whether or not they're related, nobody really knows. But that's another part of the lore of the Man in Black and what's going on with that. That was the disastrous code of the Point Pleasant. Let me see if I can come up with December 15th, disaster in Point Pleasant. On that day, the 700-foot Silver Bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. If you saw the movie, that was a pretty gruesome scene. It makes for a damn good read. I do think Keel, and I have met him on a couple occasions, he does tend to play a little fast and loose with the facts. So, you know, it's hard to say where reality fits into that. But certainly the Mothman was very real. It was written about in the press quite a bit. The core problem there was very real, and also these strange characters running around town. I just think it got a little exaggerated. I'm going to read another thing I casted about and found. This is The Iron Skeptic from Drexel University, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And basically this guy's a skeptic. He's a senior majoring in material science and engineering. And this is just kind of an attitude that we find in the mainline academic science. I just think it's interesting to ponder and defend against this type of attitude. And I'm just going to read from this. The paranormal, specifically the UFO phenomenon, is a subject that scientists must acknowledge as being of particular interest to their fields. A lot of UFO reports are hoaxes, misidentifications, or some other easily explainable problem. The public, however, has a considerable interest in the subject, and if scientists do not debunk and demystify the bumper crop of hogwash related to the subject, they may find the line between science and fantasy irreparably blurred. Even these seemingly useless hoaxes, tricks, and mass hysterias can yield valuable data for scientists in the fields of psychology and sociology. And he says basically it goes like that. If you see a UFO and talk about it, eventually some men wearing dark suits, acting oddly, will call upon you and threaten that you better stay quiet. Some believe these men to be government agents, some to be harmless cranks, and some to be alien visitors or travelers from other dimensions. But other than incredible stories, there's no hard evidence to show that these men are anything other than regular flesh and blood beings. The phenomenon of Men in Black has two scientific values. Debunking cases will counteract the blending of science and New Age hocus pocus, and investigating claims will eventually expose derangements and psychoses sufficient to write 1,000 textbooks on abnormal psychology. But somewhere in here, I don't know if I read it, but he says that lights in the sky may have a value to physicists, but one thing associated with UFOs that will never ever give up any hard evidence will be the so-called Men in Black. And I think that's a problem in any kind of endeavor or research you're doing. You really can't draw a line in the sand and say, here's my comfort zone, I can't cross it. You sort of have to go where the data takes you, even if it takes you into a minefield of craziness. You have to try to sort it out. I mean, that's what we're all here on Earth for. If we're going to pursue these matters, you can't just draw an arbitrary line in the sand and say, that's what I'm willing to go with. Okay, next image. This little book here, it's a great book. It came out in '97, and it was a fascinating book. I stumbled onto the book right at about the same time that I was questioning the Man in Black theme, because up till now, I didn't know about the Maury Island incident with Kenneth Arnold. All I heard about was these crazy John Keel books and, you know, the Barker, Bender craziness. And I really thought that it was another exaggerated part of the UFO mystery that was a little sensationalistic, and probably there's not much there. Well, boy was I wrong when I started looking into it. I started having some cases that had Men in Black episodes or things, and I was really shocked. You know, these ordinary people are telling me these wild tales. I was very, very shocked. And the same thing happened to Jenny Randles. I mean, we can really relate to each other on this. And I'm reading again, but pretty soon I'll stop reading. I know you'll be glad. But I'm going to read this because some of these things are so well put, I can't put them in my own words any better. But this is Jenny Randles speaking, and she was one of my speakers in the '99 conference. And she's a British researcher who is very prolific. She's written like over 50 books. I had long assumed that the legend of Men in Black was just part of American UFO mythology. Once you have been told worryingly similar stories from a growing band of seemingly reliable witnesses, however, you do have to reassess the situation. These people were not in contact with one another. Most had no knowledge of the American legends, and the cases were scattered across the UK over 30 or 40 years. I soon came to realize that something was going on here, and I had a responsibility to take note of what these people said. She goes on to say, I discovered that most people had taken the view that there was no serious evidence to be investigated and so chose to pretend that the problem did not exist. I cannot have that luxury. The problem does exist, and I was finding more and more examples as my work continued. The patterns that link the cases together were becoming obvious. I had to delve into this difficult area and set out for the first time the full story of the Men in Black. Okay. That they are part of the phenomenon itself, some sort of shape-changing alien manifestation, may well seem rather absurd to you. Frankly, it sits uncomfortably with me, although the UFO world is full of surprises and I rule nothing out. This is an idea proposed by some researchers and has at least traces of tantalizing evidence in support. Honesty dictates that I must take an impartial look. The other option, and the one that I suspect most readers will find easier to accept, is that the MIB are the product of a covert operation on the fringes of government study into UFOs. Even if this turns out to be the truth, it still poses huge questions. And you got to hand it to her there. I mean, if the Man in Black phenomenon is aliens trying to pretend to be G-men to harass you, to silence you, that is so strange that it's really weird. It's weirder than UFOs. But if the government is acting strange and training people to act really weird and off-kilter, to really throw people off balance, don't even act like a normal, G-man, act really strange. I can't fathom neither one makes sense to me, so I don't know what the heck is going on. So I just tell you, I don't know what's going on. There's one more quote in here, but I can't find it. My stickies lost their stickiness and they're rolling around, so I don't want to hold you up here. But this is a great book, and it opened me up to researching a lot of these old cases. Okay. One of the old cases that she has in here was one of my favorites from my childhood, the Templeton case. This is a picture that was reproduced in plenty of books about UFOs when I was growing up. But of course, back then, we're talking about cost analysis here. It was always a grainy black and white photo, and I could never really see what the big fuss was about. But now that we have the internet, we can put fairly big files of color photos. You can actually see what the fuss is about. You can see above this little girl posing with the little posies or whatever, right above her head, there seems to be this suspended robot or suspended spaceman or whatever you want to call it with a visor over his face. And it's pretty freaky. Here's a little closer view of it, and it's really pretty clear. This is the Jim Templeton case. And I'm not really familiar with Britain, so they use a lot of different descriptions when it comes to, I'll make this a little bigger, let's see. They use a lot of different descriptions to describe the geographic area, so feel free to jump in if you can clarify. But this happened in the Cumbria area, May 24th, 1964. And this guy, Jim Templeton, he was with the fire brigade. He was a fireman. And he was the official photographer for the firemen. 1964, we're talking. And he just happened to take a picnic with his wife and two daughters out near a marshy area on a beautiful day. And this marshy area is very interesting. There's kind of featureless, as you can see by this picture. And maybe I'll take it back to this other picture. There's no trees, it's just a marshland. On one end, there is a Blue Streak missile factory. The missiles are not launched there, they're made there. And oddly enough, because the British Empire goes everywhere, they are launched in Woomera, Australia. So 10,000 miles away. But that's the situation. They are constructed there. On the other end of this marsh, there's a nuclear power plant. So it's kind of an interesting area in that regard. But he goes down and has the picnic. He takes 3 little pictures of his daughter. The first one and the third one came out all right. This is how this one came out. And to use a colloquialism, he drops the pictures off at the local, I guess, equivalent of a drugstore where they have a chemist. The chemist sent them to Kodak, which was the thing to do in 1964. The chemist said, "Too bad that man in the spacesuit ruined the best picture." He was like, "What?" You know, he didn't know what was going on. But he took the pictures and he didn't even respond because he thought, that was from left field, what do I say? He went home and he started looking at his pictures and he went, "That is really strange." So he went to the police and said, "Can you help me unravel this?" The police scratched their head. They said, "Well, we don't really have the methodology to look into a photograph." I mean, so they contacted Kodak. So Kodak formally got involved. And because Kodak got involved, it was a local news story, and the picture got printed in a local newspaper, and pretty soon the government comes to call. And the government men dropped by, and they said, it's probably better off if you drop it. We're looking into it, and we're working with Kodak on it, but you should try to lay low on this. So he respected that from the government. He was patriotic, and he just wanted to give them their space to handle this, whatever the case may be. Then some time went on, I think a couple of months. But then he had 2 other visitors that showed up. And he said, "Can I ask you where you're from?" And they said, "No, you can't. We are Her Majesty's government." That was the reply. And they asked Jim to show them the site where he took the photographs. So they drove him to the site in their fancy new Jaguar. And on arriving, they began to grill him about all these different elements. Like, they said to him, "What were the animals doing? Tell us all about the animals. We really want to know details about the animals." "Well, what about the birds? What were the birds doing?" "No, really, do you remember the birds?" And he keeps wondering, "I really don't remember that much. It is true that there are some sheep and some whatever out there, and they were acting a little strange, like a storm was about to come, the way they huddled together, but I can't really put my finger on anything too strange." Well, oddly enough, it was determined from another source that at that time, right around that time, a whole bunch of these homing pigeons had been released in a big competition, and all of them went off their path, like none of them were recovered. They all went into the great beyond. And homing pigeons, it is thought now, though it keeps being refined, but they think they use magnetics to get around, because even on totally overcast days, they can navigate just fine. So magnetic anomaly might have been in place here. So maybe that's why he was grilling them about the animals and the birds and so forth. But Jim Templeton had no idea what he was talking about. Anyway, Kodak comes back with a report saying it looks like a real thing in real space. The only thing odd is if you extended his legs, he's not on the ground, he's floating. But it's completely modeled in a 3-dimensional way. It's not 2 shots, double exposure. We can't see any trickery. It looks like there really was a spaceman. Whatever that means. Well, later Templeton went out to take slides of the marsh because, he's kind of local celebrity now, and the fire brigade says, why don't we get the fire hall together, we'll charge something at the door to help the fire brigade, and you can do your little story and maybe show some slides of the marsh and explain how this all happened. So he's like, oh, that's cool. So he goes down to the marsh. Remember, 1964, we don't have electronic media, so he's got to shoot slides now if he wants to have a talkie show. So he goes and shoots the slides, and then he drops them off at the chemist like he's always done, what he calls a chemist. And the slides came back, but everything in the roll that had the marsh was gone. And the chemist threw her hands up. She goes, "I'm sorry, but we're working with the government," and they took them. And he's like, what is going on? So he delves into that a little bit. And so does, he knew a little bit of the story, but then Jenny Randalls delves into it and tries to find the paper trail. And this will freak you out. But remember, those Blue Streak missiles are made there, but they're launched 10,000 miles away in Woomera, Australia. There was a day, that same day that he was taking pictures in Woomera, what happened was they were about to launch a Blue Streak missile test, and they looked on these monitors that had the entire area, the launch area, and they saw 2 men in spacesuits wandering around. Not something you want when you're about to launch a missile and you have unauthorized people roaming around. So the launch was scrubbed for the day, and apparently they kept playing back the video trying to figure it out. And it was one of the weirder things to have happen. And then when they see through channels, other people in UK, the picture of this, the same exact time frame where the missiles are made, there's this interdimensional, God only knows what, being showing up in a picture. It really threw the government for a loop. I mean, you can think time travel, your mind really wanders, but that was a very weird incident. And when the guys picked, this is the Man in Black part, when the 2 visitors arrived at the fire, they actually arrived at the fire station. First they dropped in on the wife and talked to her, but eventually they went to this fire station. They took him to the site, and they said, what about the animals, what about the birds, what about this, what about that? And they really grilled him like he had important information. But then it's the turnaround, it's the old takeaway. Then they said, this is all a hoax, this is ridiculous, you're hoaxing us. Where was the man standing? He goes, man standing, I never saw a man. Oh, come on, oh, come on. So, and that's a pattern that frequently occurs too. There's the bad guy, nice guy, draw everything out of you and then criticize you and leave you hanging. And they really left him hanging because they had driven him out there and then they just sped off in their Jaguar, leaving him flabbergasted. So he had equivalent of about a 5-mile walk home. I'm going to get some water. I just got to get a quick sip here. That's another thing that happens with Men in Black sightings. That's not the only case. I have 2 other cases I've been able to find in the literature where the Man in Black takes you to a site where you saw something or does something wacko, and they leave you there. One guy was at work. The visitors came to his work, and they said, we're really interested in the shoes you were wearing during the sighting, whatever that means. So they took him home, and they kept studying all his shoes in the closet. They said, I think we have what we need. And they left him there, and he's like, wait a minute, I'm at home, my car's at work. Once again, so they do strand people. That's another bizarre harassment technique, I guess. The latest, talk about the CODA, that seems to be coming up. The latest addendum on this Jim Templeton case was something I saw on the internet. This was also known as the Solway Spaceman because it was called the Solway Firth. It was another nickname for the area. The Solway Spaceman incident of 1964. In 2004, they had a 40-year anniversary. And this guy put this on the net. He says, as part of the forthcoming Fred Festival, I don't know what Fred is, it's all caps, on the 10th of October, I have been asked to recreate the famous Templeton photo taken in 1964 by the fireman Jim Templeton. The picture of his daughter was ruined by the apparition of a space-suited figure in the background. I'm trying to figure out more about the incident. Was it a hoax? Was it a trick? Let me know your views and thoughts on the best way to restage the photograph. That sounds like an interesting project there. Okay. I do have one more, let's see. This is just an article that ran in 2002, I guess, just recanting it, and recounting and not recanting, recounting the story. And someone had a question, has it ever been established what was going on there with that Solway Spaceman? And, the guy, Jim Templeton, so many years later, stands by his story, stands by the suggestion that there had something, the government was very nervous about it because of this connection with the missile range down in Australia. Here's another weird one, the Rex Heflin story. And I love reading about these stories that we all know the basic storyline, but we didn't know that there was a Man in Black aspect to it. But these are the Heflin photos, which you've seen probably many times. I thought I had more of them in here, but... Okay, well, this is emblematic of the Heflin photo. Rex Heflin, August 3rd, 1965. He's a highway traffic inspector in Santa Ana, California. He snapped a total of 4 shots with his Polaroid camera, and he had the camera with him because that was part of his official duties to see if there was like a sign down or some kind of damage to the roadway that he was supposed to document for future work. So he's inspecting and he's got his camera. And all of a sudden, this craft comes up, and there's a series of photographs. I should have them all in here. Sorry, I don't. Anyway, he takes these pictures, and remember they're Polaroids, so there's no such thing as a negative. It's all in one. But the Marines from the local El Toro base approached him to study the photos when word got out that he got the pictures. He gave them to the Marines, and they returned them promptly in like 2 weeks. So he was very happy about that. And they said, we were shaking our head, we're not really sure what they are. Immediately, the same day they got the photos returned to him, 2 NORAD representatives show up and request the photos. This is September 22nd, 1965. And the photos did not get returned. Late in 1967, 2 other men come by questioning about the photos. He said he didn't have the photos, that he had given the photos away to these other men. Well, he noticed he had interference on his stereo. And there was one guy at the door, and there was one guy left in a car. The car had a strange purple glow. This visit starts making him mad because his pictures are still missing, and the government still has them. So he calls NORAD, who were the original people, the second party that currently should have the photographs. He calls NORAD. They deny they ever sent anyone to his home. He calls the Air Force, saying the last batch of inquisitors said they were Air Force, these guys with the purple glow. Well, the Air Force is all up in arms about that because they shake the place down, and they don't claim to have sent anyone to ask about the photographs. So the Air Force actually writes a memo. And let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. It says, information, let's see. Yeah, okay. Information not verifiable has reached the headquarters of the U.S. Air Force that persons claiming to represent the Air Force or other defense establishments have contacted citizens who have sighted unidentified flying objects. In one reported case, an individual in civilian clothes who represented himself as a member of NORAD demanded and received photographs belonging to a private citizen. And another, a person in Air Force uniform, approached local police and other citizens, assembled them in a schoolroom and told them that they did not see what they thought they saw and they should not talk to anyone about the sighting. All military and civilian personnel, and particularly information officers and UFO investigating officers who hear of such reports should immediately notify their local OSI offices. This is the Air Force impersonator memo that went out regarding this problem of these men in black of unknown vintage running around harassing people and shaking them down for photographs. The update on this case, which many of you might know because Ann Druffel worked on it, is, and then correct me if I'm wrong, if someone knows the date, I believe it was 2002. But believe it or not, Rex Heflin took these pictures in 1965. In 2002, he gets a phone call from a woman in black who says, "Have you checked your mailbox lately?" And he says, "What?" And then it just hears click. So he goes to the mailbox. He's got a rural mailbox. He walks out there. You know, he's got a long driveway, 1/8 of a mile or something. Nothing's there. What's the big deal? He goes back to his house. 15, 20 minutes later, the phone rings. A woman's voice says, "Have you checked your mailbox lately?" He said, "I just did," and nothing, and click again. So he goes out to his mailbox, and the photos were returned. So we have the photos were returned in modern times here. I think it was 2002, but it might have been like 2000. I'm not sure. Well, Ann Druffel takes that to heart, and she writes a proposal up for the Fund for UFO Research to have these Polaroids looked at with modern science to see if they could see a hoax or see anything else in there. And I will say that the photographs came through extremely well, better than you could have imagined, because Heflin had reported the very subtle effects and features on these craft that the Polaroid did not pick up. But after the modern technology got done with it and enhanced it, these features actually became visible. So it really validated his whole story. And a very, very interesting one, and a story that brought out the official memo of the Air Force officially saying, "Hey, all you impersonators, what's going on?" This is just an article that I have in here. Oh, I don't have it in here. Okay, that's fine. It was just another article I had from Flying Saucer Review about, it's sort of like a roundup of all the impersonators and so forth. Okay, what time do we have? I can't read what time is it? Okay. Yeah, this is good timing. Actually, it's worked out very well. I'm going to get into my 2 cases that really got me going here. So I really don't need notes so much on this except for the dates. So let me see. Well, there is another case I have to talk about. Okay. I don't have any images for this case, but let me just give you the gist of it real quick. This is in Jenny Randall's notes. There was a case of this young girl named Shirley who was 17 years old, and she had graduated high school such that she was an office worker by day, and she lived with her parents. And she lived in the Lancashire area of Britain in a place called Bolton. And she was on January 23rd, 1976, about 5:20, she got off the bus that she always took, and she had about a 10-minute walk home. And as she's walking home, she looks over in the corner of her eye towards a reservoir, and there is some lights. The light was, one was red, one was amber green, yellowish green. And then all of a sudden the lights are above her, the lights resolve themselves to be on a craft, and it looks like a pudding basin. And what they meant by that, and they did describe it, it actually was flat on top and it was curved underneath. And she can see various lights and windows and all kinds of stuff. And as it got above her, she felt a very crushing sensation. And she felt very pushed down, and she felt pain, and her teeth were killing her. And she put her umbrella up to defend herself, if you can imagine that. So she's defending herself with her umbrella. The next thing she remembers is being totally exhausted and like limping home and just being totally out of sorts. And she felt so lonely. She said, how odd, other people must be commuting at this time, and I'm just all alone out here. She didn't see another soul. That's another interesting thing about the UFO phenomenon with the odds factor. Anyways, the umbrella was pressed against her head. She felt tremendous pressure, a crushing sensation. She limped home, and she couldn't even speak. She was so shook up. She kept pointing to the sky, and she was so out of sorts that her mother called the police. The police came, and it happened to be a female police officer that took the report, who did not seem very sympathetic towards the story. She just thought she was dealing with a hysterical teenager. By the time the police officer got there, Shirley was able to choke out her story to some extent. Well, that got on the police blotter, so enterprising journalists in the community said, hey, what happened last night? What's on the police blotter? And someone said, oh, we had this girl report this sighting. Well, it ended up being a big story because there were some other, actually turned out to be young girls as well, that had also had a sighting that very night. So the local media is doing up the story, and they were asking her if she wanted to appear on TV, and she absolutely said no. No way, no way. Did not want to take it very far. She did allow a local UFO group to interview her, and she tells them the story. What she didn't tell anyone except her mother is her teeth were killing her. She was having these problems there. She had a purple-red rash from like the top part of her body as if it came down from the craft. She had some other, looked like cuts and strange marks on her body, but she didn't want to discuss that with anyone. But that was January 23rd when it happened. On February 2nd of 1976, same year, her mother received a call from a man who investigates these things, asking about the girl's health, and specifically the marks on her body. The mother just cut short the call. And she thought to herself, how does he know that she's got marks on her body? That's really strange. My daughter never wanted to talk about that. I mean, she gave a really brief report to the police and a brief report to the UFO investigator that came around that was actually identified as the UFO investigator, and people know who that was. But who is this guy calling about, does she have any marks or physical effects? Her mouth was very sore, she had burns, she was nauseated, and she had the purple-red rash on the upper part of her body. The next day, February 3rd, these two men come to the door at 7 p.m. They had black suits. One was tall and blonde and talkative. One was short and quiet. They said, oh no, we're not with the press. No, we're not UFO investigators. You should stay away from those investigators. They're UFO investigators. They're meddlers, they said. The tall one said he was the commander, and apparently with the RAF. But it turns out the title is inappropriate. If you're with the RAF, you can be a wing commander, or you can be a commander with the Navy, but there's no such thing as a commander with the RAF, so it was kind of a spurious title. But anyway, that's how he announces himself. The quiet man sat on the other side of the room with a featureless black box in his lap. He said it was a sophisticated tape recorder, but it was just a black cube that just sat on his lap, and he was like 20 feet away from the people speaking, and he never seemed to have a microphone. He never seemed to like replace the tape or do anything with the thing. It just sat there. It seemed to have no moving parts whatsoever. But they proceeded to grill the witness for 3 hours, making her go over and over and over the situation again. And it's the same kind of thing where they said, did you see anyone inside? Did you see anything else? Did you see any instruments or machines? Can you read minds? They jumped into that. Can you read minds? Can you move objects with your mind? Do you have precognitive dreams? Are you sure you don't have any marks on your body? They did that whole routine, which she would never admit the marks. Then they said, you must not talk about this matter. It's in your interest not to do so. Nobody will believe you anyway. In fact, we don't believe you. We think it's a hoax, and they would point out little tiny discrepancies in your story. It was the same kind of pattern where they suck everything out of you, and then they try to discredit you. Even the next day, the commander called again, asking her about her marks on her body, and she denied it. He called again a week later, and Shirley finally picked up the phone and said, yes, I had marks, yes, I had a rash, what's it to you, but they're all gone now, forget about it. Many years later, she had regression therapy from a doctor with a team from a UFO group. And in Britain, you have to have credentials to do hypnosis, unlike in this country. So she did have a doctor doing the regression. And they regressed her to the abduction, where she actually remembers being on board the craft and seeing beings and having medical things done to her. But then they tried an experiment. They tried to regress her to the interrogation. And when they did that, that was far more stressful than the abduction itself. And the interrogation, she said, oh my God, he's like grilling me on 2 levels. He's asking me questions, but telepathically, he's asking me a whole bunch of other questions on a whole other level. So anyway, but they said that her vital signs went off the chart, even though she was a young woman, and they couldn't pursue that because the doctor said it was too dangerous. She was too stressed out. I have an image of that coming up at the end, but my husband just found it in his files recently, so it's going to be a little out of place. But I'm moving on to a case that I have in Virginia, and this guy, his name is Don, and he did an interview with another investigator just about a sighting. And then when he had something else happen after the sighting, she said, you know, that's making me too nervous. I don't know about this guy. Can you go talk to him? So I ended up talking to him the second part. But the basic sighting is he lives outside Washington, about 10 miles from Washington proper and about 10 miles north of Fort Belvoir, which is a major military installation. But he had the sighting September 10th, 1999 at about 7:50 p.m. His wife was cooking dinner. He just stepped out on the front porch of his townhouse and looked at the sky, and he saw, this is his drawing, and he saw what he thought was just a black bird flying. And then it got big real quick, and it was a really big blackbird, and he didn't know what he was looking at. And he said that the top of it reminded him of a mushroom cap, but the way it was swinging in a jagged motion kind of gave the feeling of wings, and that's why he thought he was looking at a giant black bird. So that's one of his drawings when he first saw it. Here's another thing. He said the mushroom kind of like really became a full cap at that point, and there's, you know, he had a little trouble with the black and white, but he's trying to say that's a glow, like it had a vaporish glow around it. And this third view, it came directly over his head, and these triangles were segmented like this with you know, the 6 triangle pie wedges, and these black spots on there, they look like dark spots, but that was his way of communicating. But those dark spots are actually lights that are extremely bright, and they shone down him extremely bright. And this all happened very quickly. He ran back in the house and said, honey, we got to get out of here. There's something out here. It's trying to get me. I can't take it. We got to go. So she humored him. And they drove 2 hours to the west in a little cabin that he feels very content in, and just got out of Dodge because he thought that was the way to go. When he had this sighting or event, he was wearing a black t-shirt. Well, they went suddenly, packing hardly anything, just fled to the cabin. In the morning, he got up and his skin itched, and he took his shirt off, and where the dark t-shirt was, he had this reddish purple rash. So the feeling was that somehow the energy was kind of like magnified by a dark shirt, you know, like you would have something dark out in the sun, it would actually get hotter than a white object. And that's the only thing I can come up with. And I tried to trick him. I tried to say, well, you know, maybe something was in the shirt that you were allergic to, like, you know, where you tuck your shirt in, like right there with your belt buckle. That was probably irritated and red too. And he's like, oh no, it just showered down from my shoulders and just faded away from there. So he was very consistent in his story. Well, The MIB part of it, I'm going to give you the lead into it, and then we're just going to play the tape. The tape runs 4 minutes, so it's not like you're going to be stuck here listening to this guy drone. He does not drone. It's a very concise 4 minutes. But let me give you the lead up to it. Sometime after the sighting, which is a couple months, I just want to say the earlier investigator, Joanne, she's extremely thorough. So she drew up an abstract of his sighting. Certainly didn't put his name or his address, certainly not. But she drew up a real basic sighting, and she took it around, this copy, to the local airfields and to Fort Belvoir, and also to whoever would take it, like at the airports locally. And the only person that took it, this woman at the desk said, well, I'm not sure who would look at it, but if anybody will look at it, I know who would be the person to give this to, so I'll give it to him. But she didn't have much hope that anybody was going to digest the story. She never heard anything back. So we do know a report without any identifying material went to Fort Belvoir. We do know that. Well, a couple months later, our hero, Don, he comes home from work. His wife's cooking dinner on a Friday night. And he said, oh, it sounds good, smells good, what are you cooking? She's like, get away from me, I'm stressed out, my whole family's coming tomorrow for that brunch. I'm trying to cook some stuff up now so I don't have to cook it tomorrow morning, and I'm just going to cook and eat as I go, so you're on your own for dinner, buddy, So he's like, well, that's a fine howdy-do. So he gets in his truck and he guns the engine. I'm going to show her, I'm going to go far away, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then he realizes, well, I'm not going to do anything. So he goes across the street in his truck to this shopping center, which had this place called Damon's. It's kind of a chain. And anyway, he goes into Damon's and he looks around. It's a Friday night. It's busy. There's hardly any seats. And he sees 2 guys sitting at a table for 4, and there's 2 empty seats. So he goes, excuse me, buddy, do you mind if I grab this chair? And I'm just going to take it to the bar if you're not going to use it, and I'm going to just get something to eat at the bar. They said, oh no, we might need those chairs. We're expecting someone. And he noticed they seemed very tense and strange. 2 guys, and this is like Friday night, a big drinking establishment. It's like a sports bar. Everybody's pounding them. And these guys are sharing a glass of water. There's a glass of water there. But then he's like, okay, those guys are weird, okay? They said, perhaps you can check back with us and we'll let you borrow the chair. And he's like, whatever, I'll find my own chair, okay? So he's working his way to the bar. He does find a chair, ultimately somebody, and he moves up to the bar. He just wants to strap the feed bag on and just get something to eat, and just go home. He doesn't want any big interaction with anybody. Well, these guys come up behind him after he ordered. And it's a very crowded bar scene. And they came up and they said, we'd like to talk to you about your sighting. He's like, really? Wow, that's interesting. I know Joan went to the military places and stuff. That's kind of neat. I'm glad you guys are interested. He goes, let me eat my food. It's coming out right now. It's kind of busy right here. Why don't you guys take that bar table? I'll join you in a few minutes. I'm going to eat real quick. So he eats his dinner. He goes and sits down with these guys. And they flash some kind of badges. And he's all happy and optimistic. Wow, somebody's taking me seriously. They want to know about this. And then the scene unfolds. So we're going to put the tape on, which is the cassette tape. All right, Don. Something unusual happened to you recently. What was the date on that?
That I might have asked my wife about. That was before I went to California too. Trying to think here. I would say that must have been at the beginning of. That could have been July 30th to August 1st, somewhere in that vicinity of time.
So sometime like this summer, July 30th to August.
Yes, it was before I went out to California that all this happened.
Okay.
I'll go into as much detail as I can with this. See, my wife was home that night.
Okay.
And this was a part I left out because it was a little bit personal, but I'll tell you anyway. And don't get me wrong, my wife and I have had a very good marriage, but in marriages, we've had a few disagreements. I mean, in 11 years, we could count all of our disagreements on my 2 hands here, maybe 8 or 9 disagreements. Nothing disrespectful to each other. If we have a disagreement, we always respect each other, and we just, let it go at that. But she was home that night, and I don't even know what the disagreement was about. So I left to cool off, and I went across the street here to Damon's. restaurant right across the street. I was going to get something to eat. And I walked in there, and I turned around and looked, and these two gentlemen were looking over at me, and I seen they had extra chairs, and I didn't have a chair to get at the bar to order dinner, so I went over and asked them for a chair, and they were very polite. They said that I could have one if their company didn't show up. So I just went and got me another chair, and I sat down, and I was eating, and I guess pretty close to the end of my meal, and the one gentleman came over to me, the heavy-set man came over to me, and he asked me if he would like to talk with me about my sightings that I had. So I thought that was strange, but then I thought maybe that Joan, she reported my sighting to the military base. So I thought maybe they followed me there, I don't know. So it was funny, they left that table and they went to one of the round tables behind the bar, these circular round tables. They sat down there. And then I told them when I finished eating, I'd come by and talk to them. So I just finished up real quick what I had. I walked over to their table, and they would seem very polite at first, which made me feel easier. They seemed, they seemed real polite, and they asked me about my story. Well, I told my story to them, and instantly they turned. They went, they said it was a liar. They said that it wasn't true. I told the man where I lived, and he said that he didn't even believe that. He said I was lying about that. And then he looked at my hands, and he said, your nails are real short. He said, do you bite your fingernails? And I said, no, I work with lumber, and my hands are calloused, and my fingernails break. I work with heavy tools. And they both just started getting real disgusted. I mean, they just gave me very negative input, and just made me feel really uneasy. And I'm sitting there thinking, what am I standing here for? And then he asked for my driver's. There was a thin man and a heavy-set man. Well, the thin man didn't talk at all at first. The heavy-set man proceeded to ask me for my driver's license, and I told him, no, I won't show that. And he got up and he stood up, said, well, we'll arrest you. He said, it's against the law to file a false report with the military. And I said, well, I'm not going to show you my driver's license. And so the thin man just made a remark. He showed me his military ID, and I just glanced at it because I wasn't interested in, after that point, I wasn't interested in seeing who he was or what. He just said he was a military investigator. And then I told him no again, I wouldn't show my driver's license. And the one man left. Well, a couple of times he left and came back. I thought he was going to the bathroom, but he left twice abruptly, real quick, and he came back. And when he came back again, he asked me for my driver's license again, and I said, no, I won't show them to you. And he got up again and says, well, we'll just put you under arrest and take you in. And at that point, he left again. And then when he left again, the thin man said to me, he wouldn't look me in the eyes, he just looked straight ahead, and he just said to me, I don't want you telling this story to anybody, and I don't want you talking about this anymore. He said it's in your best interest, or that would be the best thing for you to do. And then I left. I just took off and got out of there. And I think the thing that frustrated me the worst about this, it went over in my mind again and again and again. I said, why did I stand there like some puppet and take that from them? I could have called the police and, just blew them off right there and put them in their places. But here I was so overwhelmed by the way they were treating me, I was just defending myself. I just drew a line all of a sudden, and I said, at least I'm not going to show them my driver's license. I'm going to draw the line right here now. And I think to me, it was more like a brainwashing where they spoke to you nice 1 second, and then the next minute they were degrading you. They were either calling you a liar or, it was very strange the way they acted. So I just got up and left there, and I came home and I told my wife about it, and I called my mother and told her about it, and she asked me if I was going to report it, and I said, well, it's so bizarre, I don't know if I will or not. And And that's why I waited this long. The more I thought about it, I says, well, a lot of things bothered me. Why, I wondered, then after I left there, I wondered why didn't they come to my house here? Why did they walk up to me in the restaurant and approach me there? And it was just a very strange event.
Okay, I wanted to let you just tell it in your own words, and I wanted to go back over it, okay? You just needed some space from your wife at that moment. No
Yeah, we
big
can
deal.
probably
And
cut
like
it.
you said,
because I don't want to keep everybody here all night. That's a typical case where you get on the phone with somebody and they come up with all this detail, but then when you do the tape, they sort of hold back on some details. But originally he had told me why he and his wife had the fight and so forth. But some other details he told me before we had the tape going was that this guy, the big guy, was standing up saying, "We're going to take you in, we're going to arrest you, we're going to take you in." And he kept opening his coat, showing him handcuffs. And he said the little hostess, little 17-year-old blonde, was getting very agitated because this guy was really loud, and he was showing handcuffs and acting real weird. I mean, she just didn't know what to make of it all. Like, is one of our patrons going to get arrested or what? And he kept saying, "I'm not in the military. You don't have any hold over me. I gave a truthful story, So that's the situation. There's a lot of parallels between the Shirley or Shelley, I guess, is the pseudonym for the girl that I was telling you about in Britain. That's a case that Jenny Randall's discovered. I mean, it was public knowledge that this girl had this sighting, but she uncovered the other part of it, the fact that it was a full-blown abduction, and also the part that involved the commander and his friend coming by. And the cases are very similar, so I think it's interesting because these are both cases that have not been given any press. I mean, Don's case is my own case. And the interesting thing is sort of like the paranormal beginning of the event. Like, how did these guys even track down this girl, Shelley? Her address or phone number was never given anywhere. Same thing with my friend Don. He didn't know he was going into that restaurant until 30 seconds before he went through the door. How could they be waiting for him? It makes no sense. But yet that's how it plays out. The military commander announced himself. They were told Don they were military investigators and flashed some badges. They jumped on minor changes as evidence of a hoax, and they were rude to the point of aggression. At first they were polite listening to Don's story, then they turned on him, harassing. The one who did all the talking was tall, the shorter man was quiet. That was how Shelley described it. And he said there was two men. The heavy, large man did all the talking. The small, thin man was quiet. They sat at the table with water. As far as he could see, they never even took a sip of the water. The husband of the wife, well, the father of Shelley is what I should say. The father of Shelley said, I have never been able to understand why I did not throw them out, why I let them hound Shelley hour after hour. I would normally not tolerate something like this. Why did I let them do this thing? And similarly, my friend Don says, why did I stand there like a puppet and take that? It was like brainwashing. So there's a lot of similarities there. I did forget one little factoid with the Jim Templeton case. I'm just going to bring you back to that picture real quick just to refresh your mind. But when these two guys picked him up at work and took him back to the location and then started grilling him, and then they left him there, they didn't even use titles. They didn't use names. They didn't use titles. They called themselves Number 9 and Number 11. I find that very interesting. Number 9, what do you think? Very weird stuff. I'm going to wrap up with my last case. In this case, the only publicity it's gotten is this guy, Gary. I met him up at Pat Marcatilio's conference. I spoke on Men in Black, and he approached me and said, the weirdest thing happened to me. And here, this is another case, not as complicated as Maury Island, because we don't want to be here that late, but it's kind of has a few of those elements to it. In other words, if this is a hoax, whatever that means, it's very complex, and it involves a lot of working parts and a lot of coordination. But there's this guy named Gary, and his name is very clearly stated in the clip that you will hear that he gave me. So there's no mystery there. His name is out there. Please don't try to find him. He's not in Brooklyn anymore. He was in Brooklyn when this occurred. Just to let you know, Gary's family has been known to ufology for close to 30 years. Bruce Maccabee, who's a good friend of ours, he's an optical physicist and used to be the head of the Fund for UFO Research, a good friend of ours, amazing pianist. He played piano at our wedding, and he's just a great, great friend. He had worked with and investigated a sighting that this guy, Gary, his father and his uncle had had over the years. And he was very much interested in the UFO subject and showed up at quite a few meetings. Where I'm talking about Gary's father. I never met Gary's father because I just never intersected with him. But up at Pat Marcotilio's conference, I talked about Men in Black, and Gary came forward and gave me this amazing CD that you're going to hear. And I think it runs about 6 minutes. I could be wrong, but it's not interminably long once again. And this is so weird sounding, you'll want to hear it. But the case here is, this happened about 9 years ago now, and this guy Gary was with the Army, and he was a pharmacist, and he was stationed down in Texas. And I guess what happens in the military, sometimes you suddenly get a 3-day pass, you put in for it, and you don't know if it's coming up, and wow, I get a 3-day weekend at home. So he was going to fly back to Brooklyn and surprise his family and his best friend. Didn't tell anybody he was coming. It was kind of a last-minute thing that he got approved. So he's taking a commercial flight, he's in the airport, he's waiting to get through the gate. Remember, this is pre-911, not as much security, but he's waiting to get through the gate. And he's wearing his actual uniform, and it was winter time, so he had a V-neck sweater on that was part of the uniform. And he had his name tag that was partially obscured by his V-neck sweater. This all comes into play. So he's waiting for the flight. This guy comes up to him and starts chatting him up and says, "Hey, where are you going? You know, what's going on? Where do you live? What's happening?" And so before he knows it, he's telling him where he lives, you know, what apartment complex he lives at, and yeah, I'm at the base, and I can tell you're military, but I can't see your name tag. And this guy has a clipboard, and he's trying to verify his name. At that point, Gary gets a little skeptical, and he goes, "Well, what's it to you, man? What's it to you what my name is?" He goes, "Well, you know, I don't know. I'm just developing a business." And he got the impression the guy was doing like, you know, home business or Amway or something. He wasn't sure what the guy was getting at, but it made him uncomfortable. He didn't like it. He's like, "Well, I got to catch my flight." So he's happy when he gets to go through the gate and the guy can't go because he doesn't have a ticket. Well, he goes and sits on the plane. He's relieved, you know, and he's sitting there. Another guy, completely different guy, comes up, sits down next to him, same exact rap. "So what's your name again, and how long are you going to be away from Texas, and what's going on," and all this kind of stuff, and how do you spell your name with a clipboard? He's like, "Look, I don't know what you guys are up to, but you know, I'm not buying. I don't care what you're selling." Right about this time, the stewardess comes by and says, "You're going to have to move along. This is not your seat. You're going to have to move along." So he moved along, but then he came back and he sat on the row behind him, and then he's like leaning over the seat doing the same thing to him. "Now, what was that again? Now, how do you spell your last name? Now, how long are you going to be away from Texas?" He just can't believe it. So finally the stewardess comes up again and says, "Sir, you know, this isn't your row either, blah, 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 blah." You know, finally the guy gets seated. Meanwhile, our pal Gary, he's like really sweating it. He's like, "What are these guys up to? 2 different guys. I don't know what the hell's going on. And I think my place is going to get robbed this weekend." That's what his main thought was. So as soon as he gets off the airplane in Brooklyn, I don't know what airport he flew into, but he gets on the horn and says to his landlady, you know, "Hey, you better check out the apartment. Can you get the police watching it? Because there's something funny business going on. Some guys want to know how long I'm going to be gone." So anyway, so that's his first feeling. Well, he goes home, and his parents are like, "Ah, that's great, you're home, Gary. Wow, this is great." And he says, "Yeah," and he goes, "I'm going to call up Tony," or whatever his name is. I don't know his best friend's name. He said, "I'm going to call him up. We're going to go run around." So he calls him up and says, "Hey, what's shaking? I'm in town, man." And he goes, "Yeah, I know." He goes, "What do you mean you know? I mean, this is a surprise." And he says, "You just called me 20 minutes ago." He goes, "No, I didn't. I was in the air 20 minutes ago." He goes, "No, man, you called me and you said you had a cold. You didn't sound like yourself, but you still wanted to go out this weekend." And he's like, "What? I didn't call you. That wasn't me." He goes, "Man, it had to be you. I mean, who would call and claim to be you and have a cold, but you wanted to run around this weekend?" He goes, "It wasn't me." But that's very bizarre, okay? Well, it comes to pass that he starts getting these weird phone calls from this personage or robot or whatever it is, and he starts recording the calls, and this goes on throughout the weekend. And at some point, just so you know, His mother gets on the phone at one point and says, "It sounds like a robot." His father gets on the phone at one point, the uncle gets on the phone, and the father and the uncle try to reason with it, saying, "I know what you're about, you spaceman, you," and it gets really funny. Because they'd had, the uncle and the father had this UFO sighting years before, and they think it's tied into that. I asked Gary, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" You've never heard a more pregnant pause in your life. I mean, most people say yes or no, or I saw something funny. Big space. I'm like, "Are you still there? I mean, what's the answer?" He said, "Well, I've never seen a UFO." But it turns out he's had a lot of weird poltergeist, mind-bending experiences that are hard to quantify. But his father and his uncle have seen UFOs, and I think there's more to the story as far as that goes. But no more words need be said. I'm just going to let the sound speak for itself, and I want to have it professionally analyzed. But so far, my attempts to get somebody even interested in it have not been good. But let's just let this play, and then I'll say my goodbyes. We might have to cut it off short because I can't remember how long it is.
Yes, this is me. Can I speak to you? Can I ask why you're... Yes, can I ask why you're calling? Can I please ask... Yes, this is. Yes, that is me. Say that again? This planet. Leave? We come. I'm staying right here. To be within this planet. Is this a joke or what? I have to think about that. I'd like to see you. To be contact as the same with you.
Hey, let me tell you something. I've been listening to you, and I've had contacts with you.
Government interference? You have? Please explain what type of interference. Okay. Interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them. Appears. The sun will rise on the dark side of world. No.
The sun will rise from the dark side of the moon.
Okay, what branch of the government? What should I do? Government interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them. Okay. Is that good for me or bad? They hung up. Yes. I'll tell you who it is. Yeah. want to speak to him?
There's Gary's son Frank there.
Yeah, who's this? Steven? Are you playing games with me or what? Huh? Steven, if you're playing games, I'm going to kick your ass.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
Huh?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Yeah, this is you, Steven, you idiot. You're pissing me off. You jerk. I'm going to get you on... Let's see what it says. Review. One new call out of area. Is Steven out of the area?
Are you going to be back from Texas?
Wait, say that again?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Wait, hold on. Is Steven out of the calling area or what?
What do I know?
What do you mean you don't know? He's in Queens. Well, who are you talking to? I don't know who the fuck I'm talking to.
Hello?
Hello?
Here's Gary's son Frank there.
Who is this? Sounds like a freaking robot.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
What was that again, sir?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Oh, be quiet, huh? Sorry, would you see that again? Hello? Being impersonated by what voice?
Hello?
Yeah. Hello?
Here's Gary's son Frank there.
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, what is your question? I'll answer it.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Right. When am I coming back? Is that your question? Okay, there was a break. Hold on. You want to know when I'm coming back to Texas? Oh, is that your question?
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long am I going to be back from Texas? That question doesn't make any sense.
By the other voice.
Okay. I'll be coming back eventually. I can't tell you when. You should know that answer to the question because you seem to know more about me than I do.
Well, I think you get the idea.
Speaking.
It doesn't really get any better or worse or whatever. Yeah, basically the voice, in case you couldn't hear it, it says over and over, is Gary Sudbrink there? Which, that's his name. And it says you're being impersonated by the other voice, which earlier in the day he was impersonated by the other voice. And then it says that kind of twisted sentence of how long will you going to be back from Texas? Something to that effect, which doesn't really make grammatical sense, but it's very similar to the two guys with clipboards that kept sort of, asking the same question. And then it says beware the full moon or something about the full moon, the dark side of the moon, and it's, I cut it off because people have a life here, but at one point the uncle gets on the phone and says, beware the full moon, or look to Orion, it says. Look to Orion. He goes, oh my God, let's go out and look to Orion right now. Oh my God. They're getting all excited that they're going to see something. Of course, they never do. But it's neither here nor there, but if it was a hoax, it involved one person actually bought the plane ticket. That's the only way they could have gotten on the plane. Another guy with a clipboard walking around the airport. Somebody else doing the impersonations of him on the phone calling his friends, or a friend anyway. And then the other voice, the robotic voice, calling up saying you're being impersonated by the other voice. And then this very strange staccato thing of beware of government interference, and it says contacts to be disrupted by them. But the way it says is contacts to be disrupted by them. It's like so strange. You have to listen to it many times to pick up on it. But neither here nor there, just out there. But those are some things that I've run into in the field, and I hope you enjoyed it and can get some sleep tonight. And it's good to see you guys. So.